have to deal with this idea of form. And form in music, I don't know how many folks have been through music classes, but to be very, maybe oversimple, we usually talk about form in music with alphabetical numbers. Alphabetical numbers, how about that? Alphabetical letters. I haven't had my coffee yet, again. And so, you know, if we have, and you could think of it more in terms of, I guess, pop. You could think verse, chorus, bridge, you know, whatever the case may be. But a lot of times, if I'm arranging a hymn, I will think of like the verse. I'll consider that my A, and then there might be a B section, which might be the refrain. Then there might be an interlude. Just some kind of way. The way you label it is not necessarily as important as the way that you do label it, I guess you could say. So, I don't know, I have a book out there. Again, I'm so happy I'm about to start writing a third solo piano book. I don't get around to piano writing as much as I would like. But I have a book out there. I'm going to pick this arrangement. There is a fountain, just arbitrarily here. And kind of walk you through a little bit about what I mean of form. If you guys had this book at home, okay, or anything, as you play through it, what you would pretty quickly digest is you've got 4 measures of an introduction. Okay, I start out with 4 measures of an introduction, then the hymn comes in, okay, down here. And the hymn plays and plays however long that particular hymn is. And then long about right here, I bring back the introduction again, right? So you could say we've got introduction, verse 1, a little reprise of the introduction, and then it goes into verse 2. Down here is really an interlude. Okay, it's not the introductory material again, but it's an interlude. And then we have verse 3. Okay, with the obligatory key change, right? And so verse 3, and then at the end it goes and brings back the introduction one more time. Now that is one form among millions, but let's kind of think about what that form is. Okay, what I just gave you. It was a 4-measure introduction. It was the first verse. It was bringing back that 4-measure introduction. It was the second verse. It was an interlude, which, well, we could count the bars, lasted about 4, 5, 6 bars, 8 bars. And then it was the final verse, and then bringing back the introduction again. Well, there's a form. Okay? And that's probably a really standard form that people use. Well, this is a simple kind of thing, but a lot of people don't necessarily think like this. When you're creating an arrangement, it is not copyright infringement. It's not wrong to have someone's arrangement that you admire up right on your piano, and you say, okay, you know, Brad arranged There Is a Fountain, I'm going to arrange What a Friend We Have in Jesus, but I'm going to copy his form exactly. I'm going to create a 4-measure introduction, and then I'm going to go into the verse like he did. Then I'm going to bring back that introduction. You basically use the form of an arrangement that you like as a template. And a lot of people, they think, oh my gosh, I've got to do a whole, you know, piano arrangement. It's going to be, you know, how many bars long. And there's something that is unnerving and something that's really scary about looking at a blank page with the, you know, limitlessness of music stretching out before you. And then you got to write something. Creativity always, for whatever reason, a psychologist or someone that studies this could answer this, I'm sure, but creativity tends to always work best when we set up limitations for ourselves, that we work within, parameters that we work within. And so one of the ways to kind of start to channel your creativity is before you write an arrangement, decide a form. And then I'm going to know that this is the world that I'm going to be working in. Does that make sense? Okay? And so study as many forms as you can. Go out there and grab a Heather Sorensen book and see what she does. Look at every piece, you know, and figure out how is she, you know, using form in her arrangements. And you can call it A, you can call it B, you can call it verse, chorus, refrain, whatever you want. The important thing is just that you label it, okay, and figure out what's going on. Any questions on that? I'm going to move on through unless we have questions, and then I'm happy to stop and, you know, entertain questions as much as I can. The fifth one, and I will admit to you also that a class like this does presuppose some degree of understanding of music theory. And unfortunately, you know that in an hour we can't, cover everything about music theory that you would cover by spending time with a good theory book or taking a class. And so as I move through this, some of the things, if you haven't had theory in a while, or if you've not had theory, it might, kind of sound a little overwhelming. There's a couple of great theory books that I always recommend before the class is over. If you'll remind me, I'll let you know what they are. But the fifth one, does the arranger employ any standard arranging devices? Now this is where we start to get a little bit more into the creativity of arranging. And when I'm looking at an arrangement that someone has done, I want to kind of check out what kind of clever things they've done and then see if it's something that I can incorporate into my own bag of tricks, okay? So what are some of the typical arranging things that folks like to do? Could be an altered time signature. You take something that's in 3/4 and put it in 4/4, right?
Or 7/4.
Or you know what? In fact, let's talk about that for a minute. I brought that book, and that's I think you're probably referring to the Hark the Herald.
Yeah.
I have a Christmas book out called Born the King of Angels, and one of the pieces in there is an arrangement of Hark the Herald Angels Sing. And Hark the Herald Angels Sing, of course, is in 4/4, right? And I was just noodling around at the piano. I'm a jazz player from times back, and I was noodling around at the piano, and I thought, well, you know what, this kind of works nice in 7/4. And a lot of times, arrangers will, you just kind of think, oh man, they're putting, what's the deal? They're putting something that's in 4/4 into 36/42 time signature or something. That's not even a time signature, I'm just making. But, you kind of get the idea that they're just trying to be clever, and it doesn't quite fit. But this really seemed to flow naturally. And so here's what it sounds like, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So Hark the Herald Angels in 7/4. Can't count and play, sorry. 1. Let's try that again. I can't count and play it. I'm trying to show you where the 7/4 is. I'm going to let you guys just do it, and I'm going to play. Here it comes. In there somewhere, folks. Take my word for it. And the funny thing is that Lloyd Larson at Lorenz, who edited this book, he said, "Oh, Brad, you can't write 7/4. That's going to freak people out." And so what he did instead was take all those measures and make them 3/4 and 4/4. 3/4. So, but you know what? That's an example. So, if you were analyzing this, then what you would do is say, that's kind of a cool trick. I wonder if there's a hymn that will, I could change the time signature with, and you experiment with it a little bit, okay? But it's just a technique that you see how people do it, and then you put it into your bag of tricks. And it takes some experimentation. Not every hymn or every song is going to really work well with an altered time signature. So you have to use your taste, and your idea of what musically works. And it really, I might spend a whole day going through the hymn book, playing around with different hymns until I find something that seems to really work well for me. So don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and spend some time there with that, because it will take a little bit. The other thing that I mentioned here is, and I know you're aware of what this is, altered time signature, altered modality. Okay, now that's a fancy schmancy way of saying, take something that's in a major key and put it in minor. Well, let me get good posture here while my picture taken. Take something that's in a minor key and put it in major, or take something that's in a major key and put it in minor. We have all heard arrangements of Amazing Grace where when you get to the, through many dangers, toils, and snares, and you move to the minor key there. Well, that's very simply kind of what's going on. In the same piano book, I did an arrangement of Infant Holy, Infant Lowly, which you guys know is, very bright and happy. And anyway, I put it in a minor key, and it seemed to work. Seemed to almost turn it into something kind of Chopin-esque, kind of romantic. And again, we could unpack the ways that you do that. That takes either an ear that can help you do it, or a little bit of a background in music theory, or preferably both, really. But again, what I'm trying to demonstrate to you is just how you can kind of catalog different ideas and see what folks are doing and use that as kind of a toolkit really for your own arrangements. Probably as an arranger, the thing that I enjoy doing the most is changing the style. I've got a lot of different styles of music that I'm comfortable playing in, and I love all sorts of different styles of music. If you listen to my, if you could take out my phone and look at my iPod, it's got everything from Morton Lardson's Lux Eterno and there to Willie Nelson singing Whiskey River. I really do have everything on there. And I love taking songs that are, I just love mixing up the style with them a little bit. And there's a whole, boatload of coursework that we could talk about and how you do that. And so the thing I would probably give you advice is that if you want to take something into a jazz style, for instance, which is something I do a lot because I've got a little bit of a jazz background, well, you buy some arrangements done in the jazz style and see what people are doing, right? Mark Hayes, I don't think Mark would say he's necessarily a jazz player, but he's really, really great at imitating that style. And you can go and find out what he's done and then sit there and, okay, how do we do this? In Sketches in Ivory, I have an arrangement in there of Lord, I Want to Be a Christian, the old spiritual. And Lord, I Want to Be a Christian is usually done very prayerfully, and it is in fact a prayer, so it's kind of got that, you do it introspective and meditatively. Well, there's also a lot of joy in that when someone decides that they want to come to Christ. And I wanted to capture a little bit of that joy in that piece. So I did it as an old-time stride arrangement, which is, totally, let's see if I can remember it. It's a little bit of, something that you're not quite expecting. Well, I will tell you that when I decided to do that, I'm not a stride piano player. I went and found different arrangements. I went to websites and bought a transcription or two of Teddy Wilson, the old stride pianist. I think I got some Art Tatum in there. I found a gal named Judy Carmichael who has some really great stride arrangements out. And I studied that stuff like crazy and actually learned a lot about it in the experience. So my point is when I decided to sit down and just do a stride arrangement, I didn't roll out of bed and all of it come out. I kind of had to do my homework too and kind of figure out, okay, now what is it they're doing? What's their left hand pattern with stride piano? Okay, so we've got a bass note, we've got a chord. What kind of notes are in the chord? How many notes are in the chord? Is it 5 or 6 notes, or is it only 1 or 2, or is it 3? Do they roll the left hand on the downbeat and then do a chord, or is it single? When the left hand's doing this, is the right hand doing big thick chords too, or is it just doing little single note runs? I mean, as much information as you can figure out, that's what I did, and then you copy it. You copy it. Originality is hiding your sources. Okay? And a lot of people, they think, oh, no, that's you can't, it's not. Well, I mean, that's how composition's learned, how arranging is learned. You hear about the great past masters who would, take Bach's WTC, the Well-Tempered Clavier, and they would just, by hand, just copy out the preludes and fugues, by hand, not arranging it, not adding anything to it, just copying it out, because in the process of copying it out, they saw what Bach was doing, okay? And so that's really what we're after here. So start to catalog. Don't just say, man, I love what Joe Martin did with that arrangement in his Songs for the Journey. I love that. Don't stop there. Why do you love it? Right? Figure out what the technique is that he's doing, and then you've got a better chance of kind of copying it. Now, number 6 takes a little bit of theory, and I know it does, but if you have a theory background, what chord progressions are used? Have the standard chord progressions been reharmonized? Now, if it's an original song that someone, in a lot of Peter Sorensen's books, or someone, Mark Hayes, he will just put in new melodies and original tunes, and so obviously, there's nothing to compare that against. But if it's an arrangement of a hymn, then what you can do is take the arranger's arrangement and your hymn book, and we looked at There Is a Fountain, so you can take my There Is a Fountain and put it right up against the hymn book version of There Is a Fountain, and see where the chords veer off. Okay, and if you have a theory background, it's helpful to do this. If you have good ears, that's also good. But you can kind of sit and figure out different little harmonic tricks that people use. Okay, now let me real quick, let me just see if I can throw one out there for you. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in this later session if you care to come, when we talk about chord substitutions and things like that. I'm scanning through. Okay. Here's an example of what you can kind of get when you study an arrangement. So in There Is a Fountain, we all know There Is a Fountain. I'm showing you where I am in the hymn. And then we get to the chorus right here. That's where I'm going to work. Well, if you look at the hymn book version, There Is a Fountain's in B flat. It's a B flat chord going to a 4 chord. That's it. Okay, well, when we're doing piano arrangements, we want to spice it up a little bit more than that. And so what I did when I got to that spot is this sound. Right, okay? Well, what I used there, if you know anything about theory, is something called a 2-5-1 progression. Okay, a 2-5-1 progression. And basically, it's this. I know that I'm going to an E flat chord. Right, so what I did is precede that with the 2 of E flat, which is F minor, and then the 5 of E flat, which is B flat, and then I get to the E flat. Well, and we'll talk more about this afternoon if I don't, if you can handle any more of me today. But that 2-5-1 idea. So let's say now that I'm going to be arranging, what's the hymn I threw out a minute ago? What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Okay. I wonder, I've figured out a 2-5-1 idea that I saw in a really cool arrangement. I wonder how I could incorporate that into What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Right there. I'm in the key of F, and I'm going to B flat. So what would, for you theory geeks, what would the 2 chord be of B flat? It'd be C minor. And if this is over your head, I'm going to recommend a great theory book for you that'll clear up all your troubles with it. And then what would be the 5th chord of the B flat? That'd be a F. Okay? So instead of this, which is just kind of hymn book, what if we went? Right? All of a sudden, that takes it into a new world, right? All that is a 2-5-1 going to B flat. That's what I mean, that I kind of look at all these, and I'll tell you who's the best at it is Mark Hayes. I used to study with Mark Hayes. I was so fortunate to get to do that. I lived in Kansas, taught at a Christian college in Kansas. Mark was right down the road. And it was so funny one time, I remember, and I know this is being recorded. I don't know if Mark will ever see it, but I guess it's going on YouTube. But I asked Mark once, I said, man, I want to learn how to do all these cool harmonizations like you do. And he said, just go buy one of my piano books and copy them and study them. And man, I did. I went and bought everything of Mark Hayes that I could. And I tell you what, I did this. It's nerdy, but I did. I would sit with the hymn book version, if it was a hymn, and I would go through and see what those chords are, and measure by measure, I would compare and see what kind of cool alterations Mark did. And then once I started doing that, I kind of understood how to incorporate that into my own writing. And the really cool thing is that I started kind of imagining things and hearing them. And if you're not necessarily an arranger and you hear some of these cool chords that people use, and you think, man, I can't even really conceive of that in my mind. My mind doesn't hear those harmonies. But the more you delve into them and kind of see what people are doing, and the more you try to experiment putting them into your own playing, it's really amazing how your mind kind of wakes up all of a sudden. And, before you know it, you're sitting there playing What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and you can just hear, oh, there's a spot for a cool little chord progression to go into. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You guys get that? So, yes, sir.
Once you do that, it's
Uh-huh.
a one-way street.
There's no turning back.
You can't just play it straight out of hymnal anymore.
I know. You're right. You're exactly right. And of course, when you're playing with an organist, you have to cover.
Well, I'm the organist.
Oh, you're the organist. Okay.
Or the band.
Or the band. Yeah, that's right.
Bass guitar.
You do. You're right. Once you get other folks with you, you've got to kind of rein that in a little bit.
Is
But
there an antidote?
no, there's no anecdote or antidote.
But really,
Yeah.
how do you? It's not a moral issue, but is there a right and a wrong as far as are you staying true to the doctrine? The original chord structures.
Yeah.
When's it appropriate and how much?
Well, hey, boy, the time it's probably most appropriate, if you're an adept improviser and, in your preludes and postludes, you can do that. I don't play the organ. I'm strictly a pianist. I noodle a lot throughout the service. I direct our worship service from the piano, and as I kind of, for lack of a better word, underscore not hymns but prayers and moments in the service, I find myself doing that a little bit more. But I'll be honest with you too, and this is a crazy thought, but it is a thought, that I sometimes limit even the amount of fooling around that I do if I'm underscoring a prayer, because I don't want to draw attention to what I'm doing, And if I throw in this really cool hip chord that's going to make everyone wake up, while the pastor is praying, then all of a sudden the emphasis is on me and not on what he's saying. And so this sounds like a trite answer. I don't mean it that way. I just simply don't have a better one. I just kind of let the Holy Spirit guide me through it when it's appropriate to do it or when it's not. Certainly if I'm playing with an organist, again, you're an organist, but I'm just piano, and I know that they're going to be reading the hymn book as written, then I just improvise on what's there, but I don't change the chord structure. So that's a good point, though. All right, I'm keeping an eye on my clock here to make sure we get through everything. What contrast, this is number 7, here's a big one. What contrast are found between various sections of the arrangement? Okay? So again, just to say that you like an arrangement, I really just love the way that, Lloyd Larson or Mary Ann Kim or whoever, so many great writers out today, I love the way they did that. Well, that's not going to teach you anything, right? You need to get in there and kind of figure out exactly what it is that they did, and the more articulate about it that you can be, the better. Now, I know you don't have this, seems like I've kind of stuck on there as a fountain today. I know you don't have this score in front of you, but I'm going to play through the different sections of it. The very beginning is very simple. It's just a single note melody with left-hand chord. So that's a texture, gang, right? That's a texture that you can copy. You could take any hymn and make it just single note right hand with a little bit of a left-hand chord pattern. Right? This is a texture. This is what I mean by texture. Think like an orchestrator. Now, by the time we get to the refrain, I'm ready for a little bit of a new texture. Okay, so I start putting chords in the right hand and more of an arpeggiated left hand. Just simple. And then I go back to that texture. Later on in the piece, when the melody comes back again, it's a little bit more of a triplet figure underneath. Last time, it's a little bit more big and concerto-like. Right? All those are different textures, okay? And so maybe it's the orchestrator in me, but I love studying textures. How did this arranger, how are they doing that? Do they have 16th notes in the right hand with chords in the left hand with chords in the right? Or do they have soft chords in the right hand and a single note melody in the left? I figure out what the texture is. And then I'll just take a little snippet of texture and I'll say, that's really cool. Let's see what happens if I put that with Jesus Paid It All and see if I can come up with something interesting. So it's a lot of experimentation. And some things work, some things don't work. But I love cataloging texture, okay? Mark Hayes told me that in a piano arrangement that really about every 8 to 12 bars you want to do something a little bit different, okay? That doesn't mean, I review a lot of music for folks. Joe and I, and some of you, I know Vicki, you've been, and maybe others have been to some of the composer symposiums that happen in Atlanta and also happens down the road in Austin. And a lot of times I'll look at piano arrangements and it's almost, for lack of a better word, they know they need to change the texture and do something different, and it almost becomes a little bit schizophrenic, where, all of a sudden we've got this nice thing going, and then it's, it's rock on and off, and then all of a sudden it's back to this little. And so about every 8 or 12 bars you do want to change the texture, but the trick is it has to be done in an organic, inevitable, it's snuck that change in there and you didn't even really know what happened. Does that make sense? Now right there, I'm skipping around and I went from, measure 8 to measure 36 to 92, so it sounded very, schizophrenic, I'm sure, but if you hear the whole trajectory of the arrangement, the sections are kind of leading into one another. Number 8, does the arrangement text paint the lyrics in any way? You guys know what text painting is? Mm-hmm. Okay. Text painting is, for those of you that don't, is when you do something musically that illustrates something found in the text, right? You know, my favorite, and Vicki, you've heard me use this before, and I think in a melody class, but it really is my favorite. I'm the weirdest guy. I mean, I'm a Mahler fanatic. I've got all the Mahler symphonies on my iPhone, but at the same time, I just love me some Garth Brooks. I do. I love Garth Brooks, and when he came out in the 90s, he had this song called Friends in Low Places. You remember Friends? I love that song. And the chorus of Friends in Low Places says, I got friends in low places. I'm not a singer. But what's the lowest note in the song? Low. It's when he gets to the word low. And when people hear that, that's what made them pull out their wallets and buy, you know, a CD for $15 when they only wanted that one song, right? Nowadays on iTunes, you can go in there and just pick out whatever song you want. Although I heard iTunes is kind of being revamped. That's a bunny trail that'll cost the rest of the lesson, so we won't go down there. But anyway. Some of the most incredible moments in music is when you text paint. And it can sometimes be a little cliched, you know, so you want to be careful for that. But I love finding little ways that I can do that, and that can give you some ideas for your arrangement. I'm going to go back one more time to There Is a Fountain. Even with the title, There Is a Fountain, what we're thinking about, of course, this is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins. But when we think of the word fountain, we have in our mind what a fountain looks like. Okay, kind of cascading, rippling water. And so, for the introduction for this thing, I wanted to tap into that a little bit. And then, here comes the melody. Right? So just something simple like that just kind of creates the effect of, it's a fountain. Yes?
You know, another person, Heather Sorensen, is really good at that.
Yes, she is.
She has Whiter Than Snow.
Yes.
And it
I know.
starts out, I mean, it's snowflakes.
Yes.
And I won't play it in the summer because
I love it. That's great.
I mean, it is snowflakes.
That's
It's just
snowflakes.
snow,
That's
you know.
right. I love it.
I
I
just want
love
to
it.
stop after the introduction. I'll
That-
tell you.
Well, here in Texas, we never get to play that arrangement. So, anyway, hey, we had a little snow in Bastrop, Texas about 2 years ago, and I mean, my kids were going crazy, and it was like that. I thought, boy, we're in the frigid Arctic here. But does that make sense? And you look for cues in the text, which can kind of give you ways of incorporating musical things into that. Now, I'm really proud of that. You know what? That little melody coming down. Where did I get that idea from? I'll be honest with you. I got it from some song in one of Joe Martin's books. Honestly, I didn't copy that. It's my own thing. And unless I told Joe, hey, this came from your arrangement right here, he'd probably never even know. But my idea, my concept, what I'm trying to tell you is that Solomon had it right when he says there ain't nothing new under the sun. You know, you're just not going to truly invent something new. Everything is building on top of what everyone else has done. And so when you embrace that, all of a sudden you've got this incredible world out there that you can draw ideas from. And I knew that I wanted some kind of rippling effect, and I looked through a couple of classical books. I never really found what I wanted. Then I remembered I've heard on a Joe Martin CD that he does something like that at the beginning of one of his arrangements. I went and bought that book and thumbed through it until I found the arrangement. And then I thought, okay, that's what he's doing. How can I kind of copy that and just kind of get that effect, but put it within the context of what my arrangement is? And that's where I got it from. You know, and I'm not unique in that. Everyone does that. That's how we learn. So, number 9. Does the arrangement modulate? You know, the older I'm not old, I don't think. I'm not the youngest guy in the room anymore, but I shouldn't say the older I get because it makes me sound more wise than I really am. The longer I write, I actually modulate less. And I still modulate. The way I'm talking about it, that sounds like a lewd act or something. I don't know. Don't modulate in public. Why did we invite this guy to Alleluia? You know what? I think the reason being is that, you know, it's just done so often, it turns into a cliche. that, you know, on that last verse, here comes the big modulation. And it actually is sometimes very effective to stay home and to not modulate as much. However, if people do, if you choose that you want to put a key change in your arrangement, and they are effective, and I guarantee in those books there's probably one in every arrangement. If you want to put a key change in there, I want to tell you to go and grab a theory book, and again, I've been telling you the name of this theory book. I'll tell you what it is before we're done. But in the
You can tell it now.
you're all right, I'm going to tell it to you now. Music, here's the name of the theory book. All right, I recommend this to everyone. Vicki, you already know it because you've heard me talk about it. It is called Music in Theory and Practice. And it's written by a guy, the late, great Bruce Benward, Benward, I believe. I don't want to recommend it. All theory books are great. I don't want to recommend any above another. But as a student, my years as a student, and then also my years teaching, I just have never found a theory book that presented material so clearly and in a way that not only works well in the classroom, but I also think would be great if you're working on your own. It's just laid out and it's crystal clear. And when I switched over to that book, my own students just boom. I mean, they latched onto it too. I've just had so much success with that book. So Music in Theory and Practice. It comes in 2 volumes, and Bruce Benward, it comes in 2 volumes, and they're both great, but volume 1, of course, is where you want to start with. And really, volume 1 will get you through most of what you want to do. What you find when you get a hold of a theory book and when you start looking at music that's been written, and this is unbelievable, but it really is true, that in all the vast limitlessness of music, people only modulate and change keys in a couple of different ways. They really do. Now, there's all sorts of ways to have fun and disguise that, but there's really only a couple of different ways, and here they are. Pivot chord modulation, I wrote that down. Chromatic inflection modulation, common tone modulation, or a direct modulation. Okay? And if I'm not going to camp out too long here because we've got a couple more questions we want to get through. But a pivot chord modulation, that's where you find one chord that happens to be in one key and it's also in another key, the key that you're going to, and so use that chord as the door to get you into the new key. Okay, a very simple example of that would be if I were going from the key of C to G. Now that's an easy modulation to make, but the key of C has an A minor chord in it, right? All right, here's C, here's the A minor chord, here's an F chord, here's a G chord, here's a C chord. Well, what if I did this? C, G with a B in the bass, here's A minor, now here's a D, and then all of a sudden, where am I? I'm in G. Right, so that's a pivot chord modulation. I use the chord A minor, which is found in C. It's the 6th chord in the key of C. And it's also the 2 chord in the key of G, and I use that to move into the new key. Okay, that's pivot chord modulation. Chromatic inflection modulation, that's a fancy name for just giving you the 5 chord of the key that you're going to. I mean, how many times have we finished up Amazing Grace on that 3rd verse and we're about to go into When We've Been There 10,000 Years, and they just come down, I'm in G, and you come down to that big E flat 7 chord, and then we're in the key of A flat. Right, that's chromatic inflection. Common tone modulation, Brahms is a master of this. Just like with the pivot chord, you find one chord that's in one key and in another key you're going to, and you use that as the portal to get you there. With a common tone modulation, you do the same thing. Okay, so let's say that I'm in the key of C, and I want to go to A flat. Well, that's a C that I'm landing on. That's the tonic, we call it, the 1st scale degree in the key of C. It's the 3rd scale degree in the key of A flat. So what if I did something like this? Sorry, I pounded that. Shouldn't have done that. And all of a sudden, that's nice and smooth, and there I am. That's a common tone modulation. And then finally, we have our old buddy direct modulation, and that is we don't prepare for the new key at all. We're just in one key, and then boom, we're in another key. Okay? Now, I'm telling you what, this seems like an oversimplification, but I would submit to you that 100% of every modulation you look at, whether in a choral arrangement, look at them in the reading sessions today, or in a piano arrangement, I can trace back to one of those. Okay? And just seeing the cool ways that people have used modulations. Joe's a master of it. He always comes up with the creative, just most creative little ways to get from one key to another. But I guarantee they can be traced back to one of those techniques. And just seeing how people use those techniques in the ways they decorate it and disguise it, and that's something you add to your bag of tricks, right? And then you try to copy. Does that make sense? Okay. Moving right along. How is the introduction constructed? Here again, I hate to be over simplistic with music, but there really are only a couple of ways that introductions are constructed when you think about it. You're going to find an introduction that might be drawn from the material of the theme. So this is the old, I know I'm being very simple here, but if I were going to do Amazing Grace, I might have an introduction that, and then I start. Well, that opening, I'm not great at improvising something on the spot, but that opening little melody, well, okay, that obviously sets up, it's an introduction that's drawn from the theme of Amazing Grace, okay? An introduction drawn from the accompaniment, think Ave Maria, right, or O Holy Night. My gosh, at Christmas time, I just want someone to do an arrangement of O Holy Night that doesn't start with the obligatory triplet figure. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Dean Martin or Josh Groban or whatever. I mean, that's just how we know it's O Holy Night coming up, or the Lord's Prayer, or Ave Maria, if we have these, triplets that start. Well, that's a great example of an introduction drawn from the accompaniment. Okay, it's not rocket science, And then finally is a freely composed introduction. That is an introduction that's really not from thematic material. It's not from the accompaniment. It's just something that's a little bit more freely composed. And that's where I tend to do most of mine. And it's not that I feel that way is better than any others. It's just how my brain works. There is a fountain, I guess you could say is freely composed material, but it's not really associated with a melody of There is a Fountain. It just sounds like water, right? And if you go through a lot of my piano books, you'll find that most of those introductions are going to be freely composed or constructed. And then finally, or not finally, but almost finally, how is the ending constructed? Again, I know this sheet is written as a help for piano arranging, but really with very slight modifications, you could make this a sheet for choral arranging too. There really are only a few ways that endings are constructed, right? And as we go through this, I don't even have to demonstrate them. You know what they are. You repeat the final phrase of an arrangement, of a melody. You might repeat the final phrase of the melody, but do what we call augmenting the phrase. So, when we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Right, I took that last line of when we all get to heaven and augmented it, right, made it twice as long. Repetition of the introduction, that's something that I probably do too much. In fact, as I embark on writing a new piano book this fall, I'm going to see if I can maybe do that only a couple of times out of a 10 or 11 song book. It's just such a nice bookend and I know you've played piano arrangements this way where it starts with a nice pretty introduction. Maybe that introduction comes back somewhere in the piece as a little interlude, and then it tucks itself into bed at the end by bringing that introduction back. It's just a nice bookend, concise form, and so people do it, because it works so well. And honestly, you know, I've kind of bad-mouthed cliches in here, but a cliche really is a cliche because it works, right? Things that don't work don't become cliches. And so it is a very, you know, it's something that I use a lot, and if you go and look at piano arrangements on the market, you'll find that folks use it. Now again, let me, I know we're almost done here, but let me say one more time why I give you this sheet like this. As I talk about how an introduction is constructed, or an ending, I want you to go and find a piano arrangement that you really like, that really resonates with you, and say, okay, how did this person create this introduction? Where did it come from? Is it drawn from the accompaniment, from the thematic material? Is it freely composed? And then figure out what they did and try to copy it, right? That's what I'm trying to get you to do. If he created or she created a beautiful introduction based off of the first phrase of the chorus, then, you know, pick a hymn, Moment by Moment, or Living for Jesus, or whatever. Pick a hymn and go to the refrain and see if you can kind of create, you know, let whatever you're studying be a template for your own ideas. Same thing with the ending and every one of these points. Finally, I keep saying finally, and we're never at the last question, but number 12, what is the money note of the arrangement? Now, what I mean by that, you know, every piece of music, whether it's a short choir anthem or whether it's a large Mahler symphony, has the moment. You know what I mean by that. I mean, it has the moment where everything leads to, and the drama of the music and the message of the music, if it's texted music, everything culminates. And good arrangements have that too. Okay? Most of the time, it's going to be the loudest, most, in a piano piece, the most virtuosic, you know, whatever you want to call it, moment of the piece, although not always. Sometimes I've seen really, really effective money note moments that are actually the quietest moment of the piece, you know, where things really settle inward, you know, and before they expand again. So nothing is written in stone. But knowing that a piece of music has to kind of have that, then I enjoy taking an arrangement and looking at it with that arch in mind. For There Is a Fountain, I'd say probably when it gets to the third chorus, it's probably the money note moment of the piece. And so my next point of that question is really the crux of the matter is, don't just identify where it is, but what makes it successful. In other words, how is the material paced to make that moment really pay off? Well, you probably don't know this arrangement, but you can look at it on page and see a couple of things and see what makes that pay off. I start here with a relatively scarce, not scarce, what's the word I'm looking for? Sparse, thank you, a sparse accompaniment pattern there in the left hand. And then I've already talked about how when I come here, it moves a little bit more. Becomes a little bit more thick here. This interlude that happens, you can see there's a lot of 16th notes on the page. That interlude is kind of a propelling the thing forward. And then we have a key change, right? And then finally we have this big moment here. And so there's a couple of things that help that moment pay off when it gets there. Number one, the movement, the rhythmic activity is increasing to that moment, right? If you think about it, slower rhythmic activity doesn't have as much drama in it as faster rhythmic activity. And one way you create momentum in your arrangement is that you have the accompaniment or the rhythm, whatever is underpinning, have it speed up. Look at the choral arrangements we read through today and tell me if that's not the case. More often than not, you'll see that greater rhythmic activity in the accompaniment or in the vocal writing happens as the piece progresses and not right at the beginning, okay? Range, at least on the piano, is a big thing. The more that you use the range of the instrument, the greater the dramatic impact. One of the things that I do in that arrangement is I start here. And then finally, when it gets to that key change and it's There Is a Fountain, you know, on the last verse, It's big chords that's using the entire range of the instrument. And then, of course, our old buddy dynamics, right? You know, typically the loudest moment of a piece is going to be where everything leads to, although, as I've said earlier, not always. And so it's interesting to get an arrangement that you like and kind of think, where is that one moment that just, you know, and okay, here it is. Well, it's not enough to just say, boy, that sure is pretty, but what did the arranger do to make that moment pay off? And then there might be a little tidbit that you can pick up in your own writing. 13 is and this 13 really is a redundant question in some ways. What are some arranging techniques we can learn or copy from the arrangement? Well, that's what every one of these questions have been. I don't know why I put that there, but and then I obviously put a little place for additional thoughts. But does this make sense? The way that, you know, you probably haven't had an arranging class like this. You know, I could just sit and tell you what to do this, do this, do this, do this, but I've found throughout my years of teaching that what's really effective is when you kind of help people to start teaching themselves and be very analytical, really. The act of making music is a very creative thing. But when you're learning and teaching yourself, I think the more analytical you can be about it, and I hate to use the word academic, but almost the more academic you can be about it, the better. When I'm sitting down and writing a melody or a choral piece or a piano arrangement, I don't think like this. I don't sit and think, okay, I'm going to use this standard introductory device here, and I'm going to, and I really, it's an organic, creative thing for me, and anything on this sheet really is the last thing from my mind. But I've been doing it a while now, and when I started, it wasn't that way. When I started, I really needed help, and so I would copy, you know, like I've talked about. I would get the form of a piece and the way that Heather did an introduction or the way Mark Hayes harmonized this, and I would academically copy it and kind of start trying to get an arrangement of my own going. But like I said, a magical thing happens the more you do it, and it kind of internalizes itself. And then before you know it, you're sitting there at the piano and you're just creating an arrangement, and this stuff is happening, but you're not thinking about it anymore. It's just kind of been internalized in you. Does that make sense? Yes.
Can I
And
just
you
say
bet. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes.
I just noticed this, that I've studied a lot of classical composers,
Yeah.
and that's how I found a lot of my ideas.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You know who does that? Craig Courtney. I love Craig's writing, and particularly, well, I love Craig's melody writing too, but I particularly love his piano writing. And Craig is a big Brahms fan. And I don't know Craig that well, so I can't speak for him, but I want to say that I've heard him say before in public that he gets a lot of his ideas from classical literature. And when I play through it, I think that must be, because some of his stuff is so creative, you know, and you just think, boy, I can see Brahms there, I can see a little Chopin here. So I think that's a great idea, a great place to go back to as the masters. So, any other questions?
So
Yes, and then I'll come back.
this is not the mechanics, just when you are creating, you said you don't necessarily think of this.
Right, nowadays I
This is
don't.
probably what you use for checking yourself.
You are exactly right. You know, and in fact, I don't.
You probably don't have to.
I don't even do that nowadays because I've just done it now for a while. But
What's your usual way of starting? Just start improvising? Or
my usual way.
think about the
You know
words?
what? With me, the first thing that happens when I'm arranging a hymn is that I start looking at chord progressions. That is a lot of my entry into it. The very first thing I did with There Is a Fountain actually was come up with that introduction. And then things kind of morphed out of that. A lot of times I hold off on writing the introduction until the end, because if I write the introduction first, I really don't know what's going to come up as I go through the arrangement. And there might be a really cool chord or a really cool deviation on a melody or something that I find in the arrangement that might be a great introduction. And so a lot of times I kind of want to wait and see how the entire arrangement minus the introduction spans out before I do that. And that's the same way with my choral writing too. I've got 2 or 3 pieces at home on my computer I'm working on. Just about all the accompaniment, all the part writing is filled in, but there's about 8 measures left blank at the beginning to see how I want to do the introduction. But a lot of times what I'll do is take a hymn book page, I'll go to my printer and I'll blow it up on larger paper where I can write on it, and I'll start writing in chords that I might be interested in. I'll take, you know, whatever hymn it is that I'm working on, Abide With Me, whatever, and I'll just figure out all the different ways that I can have fun with the chords. And a lot of times that kind of starts spurring accompaniment patterns or little melodic fill-in ideas. For me, it's pretty interesting chord progressions that is my way into arranging. So, not always, but that 90% of the time, 95% of the time, that's how I do it. Yes, sir?
Do you typically write for a purpose, for a specific assignment, or just because something leaked out and you couldn't help it?
You know, it's happened both ways. You know, if it's commissioned for a choral piece, you know, there's an assignment. Every now and then, you know, I work for Shawnee Press and Hal Leonard, and so I work with Joe and underneath him. And every now and then he'll say, Brad, I have this kind of piece I need you to write. But most of the time in my choral writing, I'm pretty free to write, you know, with some freedom with what I choose. With piano writing, I don't know if I've ever done a piano arrangement as a commission. I've always done it for inclusion in a book or as part of a book. Right now I'm in the process of figuring out all the songs I want in this book that I'm going to start writing here when things settle down in a few weeks. And so the concept of the book is going to dictate the choices that I...
Those parameters.
Yeah, that's right, that's right. You know, typically it's better if you want to try to get something, you know, in print somewhere. I know you guys know this. It's better to probably hang around PD material, around public domain material. Because it might be hard, you know, if you want to arrange in Christ alone, the Gettys might not want to give you that right. Well, it wouldn't be the Gettys, it would be their publisher, right? But the publisher might not want to cede that to you. So, you know, it's better to stick around PD stuff.
What's the average length of time to arrange a piece? Just kind of a
Gosh,
ballpark.
you know what? Again, I don't spend a ton of my time piano writing. With choral writing, it can take weeks if I'm having trouble. It can take 2 days if things fly through. Most of the time with choral writing, it's about a week on average. When I was... again, I'm hesitant to say this because I know it's being recorded. I don't know if Lloyd will ever see it, but Lloyd was the editor for my Christmas book, and I was teaching college at the time, and really just had not had the time to write. He needed it at the end of the fall, if I'm remembering right, and fall was just so busy at my little college where I taught, and I really got down to the last minute, and so I was arranging a song about every 2 days to get it done. And you know what, while I wouldn't recommend that, I also would say I'm so happy with that book. That's one point where deadline created the creativity. And I, you know what, I wouldn't change a note of it. And there's things that I've spent weeks and weeks writing that aren't nearly as good as that. On the other hand, I have things that I've written in 2 days that, yeah, sounds like he wrote that in about 2 days. Not very good. So, you know, creativity is just one of those things that you cannot control or predict.
And your platform, what do you...
Finale. I am a finale snob. Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely. Most publishing companies, Sibelius is still, you know, it's doing well, and it's a wonderful program. I know that the company we work for primarily works on Finale. However, if you're writing something and you are a Sibelius user, that is not a problem. You just make an XML file and send it to us, and we convert it right over. So, gang, thank you so much for coming out here so early and putting up with me. I am doing one other session today. I know there's probably other things you want to be a part of, but if you're interested at all, I'd love to have you. And it's going to be dealing with fun little chord tones and chord progressions and how to do that kind of stuff. So a little bit more arranging material too. Thank you.